Okay, so let's get started. First, how many people here were at the convention in Phoenix, the project convention in Phoenix? Couple, right? I thought that was fantastic. Really, really good. I think this one's a little bit better. Do you guys agree? Yeah, just so much content and so much, accessibility. I love the demos. I love what they're doing with Microsoft Project. Just fantastic. Okay. So, in the 1500s, in rural Ireland, right, there was a father and son team of farmers. And they decided one day that they were going to take their donkey and they were going to ride it into town and go to the market. So they're standing outside the laneway looking at their donkey, and they're wondering how they're going to configure the donkey to get them from the farm a couple miles down the road into town. So they decided that they would put the young fella up on the donkey, and then they would go down the road. So these are two very likable, very easygoing guys. It's a father and a grown son, right? So as they go down the road, they're meeting other farmers, other people who are offering them suggestions on how to configure their donkey the best way to get into town. So, not wanting to offend anybody, they decide every time someone gives them a suggestion, they change the configuration. So this happens 4 or 5 times, right? And there's only so many ways you can configure a donkey, right? They get right in front of the town, and they've gone through all the iterations, all the configurations. They've had both of them on the donkey, both of them off the donkey, one on the donkey, the other one on the donkey. And the only configuration left is for them to carry the donkey. So they say, well, this must be the only way to go. So it takes about 20 minutes, and the young guy's in the back, and he lifts up the donkey, and the older guy's in the front, he lifts up the donkey, and they're staggering into town. And right before town, there's this river, and it's an old rope bridge, right? Single lane, single person lane, rope bridge. And so they're staggering across the bridge, and the wind kicks up, right? And they start to sway, and pretty soon the donkey goes over into the river and floats away, right? So what's the moral of the story? If you take everybody's advice, you might lose your ass, right? That's the moral of the story. So that applies to project management and some of the things that we do, right? It's really important if we're going to try and create value for our businesses or our clients that we have a good idea of where we are and where we need to go. Because EPM, and like most other large software tools, is not a one-size-fits-all, right? I think the partners that are here would tell you that if you're going to think of doing some kind of implementation, it's not cookie cutter, right? There's a lot of things that you've got to look at and be cognizant of, right? So some of the things that you'll see that we've done here at Verizon may not match up exactly with what somebody would say would be best practice. But we were a little bit different than some folks. We certainly are fairly large. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of projects. And so we've done what's best for us in our situation to drive the most amount of value possible back to our customers, which is really why I have a job, right? So that's why we did it. Okay. Any questions before I start? Is there? No? Good. Okay. All right. So this is me. And has anybody here given presentations before? I think we've all given presentations before, right? So what do you do when you're getting ready for a presentation? Do you go through trial runs and all that kind of stuff? Yeah? All right. My wife is a lovely lady. I'm very technical, and she's not. So she is the unlucky recipient of, honey, sit down in front of my laptop, and I'm going to walk you through this presentation. So she thinks it's funny. So this slide came up, and every time she sees it, she says, she says, what are you trying to say with this slide? And I said, well, I don't know. She says, listen, you're a geek. The minute you open your mouth, they're going to know you're a geek, so you don't need to expand on that. So she suggested that I put a slide in from my freshman year at Lehigh. And she says, that tells it all. That's all they need to know. I said, okay. So I'm a geek. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you a little background on how we got to where we ended up. So I work in the process reengineering organization, and I was at my desk back in March of 2010, and I got a phone call. And the phone call was from our senior VP. And he said, Chris, I need you down in the office tomorrow. And it's 306 miles from my house down to the main office. And they want me to relocate down there, and I keep saying no. So when they say I need you down there tomorrow, I say okay. And I get in my car at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I drive down. So I'm driving down, and I'm wondering, what the heck is so important that I got to, get up in the middle of the night to come down to the office? And he says, we've got a condition, right? He didn't call it an issue, but we've got something that we need to do. He said, I want you to tell me what you think the maturity of the project management process that we currently have and we're using in this space. And the space he was talking about was the Verizon outside plant work, which is about $2 billion worth of spending every year. So I said, okay. So I went back home, and I spent about a week. He gave me a week, and I went back down, and I was very honest with him. Right? We had about 11 different business units, and they were all consistent in that they used Excel. But none of the deliverables matched up. None of the milestones matched up. So I had to be honest with him, and I told him, we're fairly immature. He said, fairly mature? I said, okay, we're very immature, right? We didn't do any force-to-load balancing, right? We were just kind of tracking dates, milestone management type thing. So he said, okay, this is what I want you to do. We generate 150,000 new projects every year, and that's what gets us to the $2 billion. He said, I want you to move on this right away. So he sent me back home, and he wanted me to put together a high-level plan of how to get from where we were to where we wanted to be. And where we wanted to be, obviously, was a very mature organization with a well-functioning PMO that delivered lots of value to the organization. So I went and I spent my time, and I created what I thought was a great high-level plan. And I called up my wife when I was at work, and I had it finished. I said, this is the best project ever. This is the project that I've wanted for my whole career. This is really going to change things. I have 3 teenage daughters. I said, get my daughters together. I said, we're going to go out to dinner. So we went out to dinner. And I'm driving back down to New Jersey with my plan. That's me, happy geek, right? This is the best project ever. And so I'm driving back down. And the only thing that I'm really worried about is how am I going to portray the benefit that we're going to get from this implementation. Here's a sample of some of the studies that I used in my business case. What I focused on mostly was labor hours performance and overall cost performance. So the studies say that if you go from an immature process to a mature process, you should probably plan on saving about 25%. And I said, okay, but that's okay for, we are a big organization. We're actually lumbering, right? It takes a long time to do things in a big organization. So 25% of $2 billion a year is $500 million a year. And there was also the believability factor, right? So I went in and I said, okay, you do this, it's going to cost this, and you're going to save $500 million a year. It sounds too pie in the sky. So I'm driving back down to Basking Ridge, and the only thought is, how do I present this savings? I had decided to cut it down to about $120 million a year and spread it out over a couple of years. So I didn't know, do I say it's $120 million a year? Do I say it's $10 million a month? Or do I say it's $500,000 a day? And that's still the best job in the world, right? Because I'm going to, either way, it's the same thing, right? So very happy about that. So I'm driving down to Basking Ridge. They call me and they say, we're not meeting in the VP's office. We're meeting in a conference room. And at that point, I should have known that something was up. Because my first conversation with the VP was, this is so important. I know it's going to be big. I'm going to get you the best people I can, whatever you need. I'm going to get you a lot of money because it's going to take a lot of money. And we're going to put together a realistic schedule. And I was like, great. Everybody wants a project like that, right? Where you get what you need. Okay. So I went into the conference room and he said, there's good news and there's bad news. And when I walked in, the first thing I realized was we were not alone. There were 3 other people in the room, and they were all from finance. And I said, this is not going to be good. What they said, and they explained to me, was that resources are limited, and you're not going to get what you have in your plan. The next thing that they said was that over the course of 3 weeks, all of a sudden, money became very tight. So I wasn't going to get anywhere near what I thought I needed, right? And I was going to have to create a process where 75 project managers or less could manage 150,000 new projects a year. And that was the one that really, that really got me in the chest there. I shook my head. I said, okay, and I left. But the pit dropped out of my stomach. I didn't know how to do that. And then he said, the good news is, and I had my head down when he was saying the good news is, we still need to do it right away. And I'm saying, please don't let it be me. Please don't let it be me. And he says, and you're our guy. So I said, crap. So anyway, I turned into, instead of happy geek, I was, holy cow, how am I going to get this done? So I'm driving back up to Liverpool, which is near Syracuse, and I pull into my driveway, and my wife and my daughters are there all dressed up, ready to go to dinner. And I said, no, there's no dinner. It's all grilled cheese sandwiches from now on, right, until I get done with this project. So anyway. The one thing they did come through with, big time, is I didn't get all the people that I needed, but I got the best. The only problem is I only got 2. So I had one person to do my systems development. That's Lisa Speller. She's excellent. She's been with me from the beginning. And Steve Scott to do all of the process stuff. Great people. I called them up when I got back home, and I had my grilled cheese sandwich. And I said, we're meeting tomorrow at 7 o'clock. I said, it's not going to be pretty. I said, but we got to find some way to satisfy and to solve this business problem that we had. Okay, so I'll give you a quick preview of the results. In the third quarter of 2010, we had our first prototype done. And I'll talk about prototyping later. By September of 2012, we had implementation and cutover complete. We had gone through prototypes of the EPM platform. We had it rolled out, and we had everybody cut over by September 27th of 2012. We had over 250,000 projects on the platform currently, and we have less than 75 project managers. I checked this morning, we have 68 that are managing all those projects. So this is my friend, right? And we call this Little Stevie for one of the guys on my team. And this depicts for us, and we use this in all of our presentations. We used it in some of our conference calls. Anything we could put it on. This represents resiliency, right? In the face of unbeatable odds, you've got the little guy with the handful of sand. He's got it done. So that's Little Stevie. Okay, so the agenda. What I'm going to talk about is how I got from being in the top left corner, right, confused and really kind of disheartened, to how we worked through some items and we got to the bottom where Little Stevie is, and we were successful and we were pretty proud of it. Okay, so that's the agenda. Going to talk about productivity, iteration, and collaboration. But the first thing that I got to talk about is planning, right? So I'll talk about planning in a second. But the one thing that I think you should see as we go through it is the amount of integration. And I will tell you that we integrated almost all of the enterprise systems in Verizon onto EPM. So I'll show you what that looks like. If you have some deeper questions afterwards, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay? Okay, planning. Verizon, just like a lot of other companies, we have lots of data. We have data all over the place. We have enterprise systems that deal with financials, that deal with resources, that deal with logistics, that deals with material inventory. All of these items that the project managers need to know about, they're there somewhere. In order for the project manager to be productive, we need to bring all that information onto the platform. The data integration planning for us was a big deal. We needed to know what the project lifecycle was going to be, and we needed to document that, right? Because we were kind of setting the stage. We also needed to know what the integration points were going to be along the project lifecycle, and where the data was, and where we were going to get it from. And we broke all the data into three separate categories. Work layer. Work layer would have all of those items, say engineering prints, things that are drawn. It would also have material orders, that kind of thing. And then we have the materials layer, which would have the tracking of materials, right? Cost of materials, that kind of thing. And then at the top, we have what we call the actuals layer, right? And this would be your financial reports, completions, that kind of thing. There's a bunch of lines that are on this one, back at my office. I took them off because it's very confusing, right? But all that data needs to flow down through, hit the right integration point, and be appended onto the platform at the right time. It's a nice cartoon, but it's been very important, and we still use it today. The other thing is platform configuration. This is not something that you want to do on your own. And even now, when we upgrade, we don't do that. I have a team of developers that helps integrate all of our work, and I don't do that. It just doesn't make sense. You need to have a partner that does this all the time, right, to help you do configuration. Because this is what our EPM 1.0 configuration looked like. I wouldn't say you. I could screw it up, right? So we worked with Fragility from the beginning, and they helped us out with getting our first 2 prototypes up and going and configuring everything so it worked for us. Okay? So 2 things, planning-wise, you got to map out the data, right? And you need to work with somebody to get the platform configured correctly. Okay, so now I'll talk about productivity. When you take the number of projects that have to be planned, updated, and maintained at $150,000 a year with 75 project managers, that breaks down to about 40 new projects per project manager per week, which is about 8 projects per project manager per day, which is a project per hour. It's a really very consistent and very fast pace. It's one of those things that I knew that we would have a challenge solving, and it was the people that I worked with on my team that actually came together and put together a plan to actually resolve it. So there were a couple of things. One, we decided early on that the value of the project manager wasn't in updating their workbooks. The value of the project manager is being unchained from the desk and doing what project managers do best: lead, negotiate, resolve issues, that kind of thing. So we had to figure a way. We set a benchmark, and the benchmark was we wanted the project managers attached, right, in the system less than 1 hour a day. So there were some things that we had to do to resolve that. One of them was standardization. First thing we had to do was define standard work types. This was not easy, but it can be done. Create WBS prototypes, right? We call that left-hand side of the Gantt chart when you go into a Microsoft project. Our standard is that's the WBS. I know that some people might do it differently, but that's our WBS, right? If you looked at the slide with my picture on it, you'll find out that I'm an industrial engineer. So I'm not adverse. Well, first of all, I like Lean Six Sigma and DFLSS and all that stuff. But I'm certainly not adverse to doing studies, right? One of the big ones we did in the beginning was a keystroke review. So we defined the roles of the project manager, we sat them down, and we observed them. And we actually tried to go through it ourselves and figure out what is it that takes, what's eating up the majority of the project manager's day. We also did data mapping, right? Data mapping, trying to figure out if we were going to automate things, where they best would fit. And then deliverable definition. And that'll become clear later on, okay? So the biggest issue that we had, the biggest function that ate up the most of the project manager's time was actually creating the WBS, creating the project plan. Getting a notice from somebody who says, I want to do this, and then actually going in, defining the steps, the durations, the dependencies, and all that stuff. If it took 2 hours for a project manager on the average to create their WBS, that would be 300,000 hours a year. At 2,000 hours per, that would be 150 project managers we would need just to do that. Well, we were only going to get 75, so we had to do something differently. So what we did through the study is figure out how to complete 95% of the original project plan without the project manager having to intervene, okay? So first thing we did was we took all the data that flows to the system, we had to projectize it. Projectize it means take it from the raw data that it comes in, whether it's SAP or wherever it is, and projectize it so that it maps correctly to the right project, the right task at the right time. Okay? So we took things like bills of materials, we took standard work types, and we set initial milestones. Whoa, and logical dependencies. That was the first overlay. After that, we put standard resources in. So we have 800 or 900 standard resources across the organization. There's a resource table, right? Each one is tagged to a geography, and each one has a different productivity, which is computed behind the scenes based on 12 months running average, right? So that's what we use in order to assign the resource and put the productivity table in to determine the amount of work, okay? All of that stuff comes together, and we create the original WBS. This one's a small one. It's about 106 tasks, which is pretty small. But that's what the project manager sees the first time they see it. Okay? Saves about 95% of the keystrokes. Saves them about an hour and 10 minutes for every project. Okay? That was big for us. The second one is actually updating the projects. So each project manager would have every week, a scheduling meeting or a call with the individual project owner. So they would have a conference call, and they would go over between 20 and 40 projects. They would have to update those projects. So what we found was that they were printing out their schedule, they were having the call, they were making their updates on the piece of paper, and then the next day they were going back to their desk and they were opening up all the projects and making the updates and then saving, closing, and publishing them. And that was eating up a lot of time. So we wanted to eliminate that. The best case scenario is the project manager is on the phone, right? You've got 20 or 40 projects you've got to update. You want to do it then. So if you're on the phone for an hour, so you're on the phone for an hour, 10 minutes. When you get off the phone, it's done. Everything's updated. So we created this tool here, which we call the schedule input screen, which brings up all of the projects in I would say a fairly simple form, right? That you can input whatever updates you get from the resource owner, and when you're done, hit the submit changes, and it'll go and it'll update all your workbooks for you. Okay? So as we were going through, we had, and I set in a bunch of calls. There might be 40, right? 40 projects that need to be updated. Maybe 15 of them, the update was it's complete. I completed it yesterday, right? So we added things like a complete button at the end. So if you're going through and I'm talking to Rob and I say, what about this job? You're 3 days late. He says, leave me alone. I completed it this morning. I say, okay. I hit the button and it goes and completes. What happens when you submit it as well, right? It'll go and it'll update all of the information, like your scheduled finish date behind the scenes, and it'll pop up a couple seconds later if you end up changing the finish date. For items that are too complicated to use the form, and there's some that are like that, that little blue arrow on the left-hand side, you click on that, and that'll pop up your project plan for you. You can make the updates there and then save, publish, and close it, just as you normally would. Okay. Any questions so far? No, this is all in EPM. Yeah, I do have a team of developers that work in my group, and they did all this work. Yeah. Okay. It's a good question. Very good question. One of the things that we had trouble with the project managers was some of them were new, right? I got some new people, right? They didn't understand best practice for updating projects. So we put a toggle in here that said you can either update actual work and remaining work, right? Or actual total work and % work complete. And depending on the toggle, we'll determine which of these input boxes are available. Okay, so they can put in the amount of work, they can change the status date, they can change the start date, they can change the total work, they can change the number of resources that are assigned to the individual project. You see over there it says revised resource units. If you decide we have 2 people that are assigned to that, we want to put 6 on it and see what happens to the completion date, they can do that. And I think that's about it. Okay, did I get your question? Good question, though, and that brings up a point. Our friend Eric, if any of you that were on the PC-14, you'll see I put a note on that I was going to give away this book, Forecast Scheduling, to the most active participant in the session. So we've got two leading contenders over here. Okay. Okay. Sure, yeah.
So you say EPM, and I'm relatively new to the PM world.
Yep.
Can you clarify what you mean by EPM? That tool you developed, that tool Agility did? Explain that.
Okay, this in particular, and I'll go back to the schedule input screen, we did. Okay? It's actually a web page. All right, that's tied in the back to EPM, and it does a lot of the individual keystrokes that a person would do. Right? It just does it behind the scenes, and it does it faster. And there are things called loaders, right, that are actually little software packages that actually take the data and they do it. Okay.
2013 or 2000.
This is 2010. We're on 2010. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. The other key facilitator for project manager productivity has to do with what we call schedule jeopardies. So if you're going to have so many projects, and the loaders, right, and I should explain this, every hour when information changes with your project, right, whether somebody puts through a timesheet, somebody completes a task in another system, somebody cancels a work op, whatever it is, the enterprise systems behind it are, the data is ported over, and we use what we call a delta loader, which updates all your projects for you. So you'll be sitting there during the day, and your projects are going to change. You don't have to change it, but your projects are going to change. And we needed a quick way to be able to parse through those projects and find out which ones were in trouble. So we did that by doing what we call the Schedule Jeopardy report. And the Schedule Jeopardy report simply takes your scheduled finish date for a deliverable task. Remember I said in the beginning it was very important to define your deliverables across the organization. A specific task, and compares that to this. See, this works here. No? Okay. The customer commitment date. And in this example, the customer commitment date is July 6th, right? So as we sit now, we're scheduled to finish on July 4th. We should be good, right? The customer should be happy. As I go through the next screen, you'll see that we get an automatic completion on line 5. It was actually finished on June 7th, which is 3 days later. Because it was finished 3 days later, now our anticipated schedule completion date for that deliverable task is now equal to the commitment date. And we have a process that will go through based on the RBS for the individual project manager. We'll take all of their projects and compare the two. And if your commitment date is the same date as the schedule completion date or after, it will provide for you a small list, hopefully a small list, right? So you'll see July 7th, July 6th pops up, and July 6th, and what we end up with is the Schedule Jeopardy report. So project managers at any time during the day can pull up the report, and we'll give them a real-time list of all of their projects. Hopefully there's none, right? We don't like to miss due dates. So they can check without having to open up actual projects. Okay? Sure. Okay. This is just a screenshot. So for this project, I was in Microsoft Project, and I opened up the project information and just pulled it down into the view. Right, every deliverable is matched to an individual deliverable task, which has to be consistent across all those types of work. Okay? Okay. New front runner for the book. Oh, here we go. Yes? Sure, you can. Yep. Right. That's a great question. That July 6th, which is in the project information, that comes to us from the sales group. That comes to us through another system where the salesperson had made a commitment to the customer, right? Maybe it was Accenture and said, we're going to have an OC3, July 6th up and ready on your right? So they made the commitment. That is a fixed date. This one over here, our anticipated scheduled date, and one thing to remember is it's June 7th, and it pops up on our list. It's not due till July 6th. So we've got some time to try and get it back on track. But the project manager is responsible for that date and meeting that date. If the project manager can't meet the commitment date, they have to call the sales folks and say, I've got a real problem and expect some escalations, right? Okay. They can edit the WBS all they want. Yep, they can. Yep. Okay, schedule jeopardy. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about being agile. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that we went through in the development of this. Okay. It was very, very important for us to be flexible. We had a group that was not very mature as far as project management goes. There were a lot of new people, right? We needed to be very upfront with them on where we were going. We had some executives that were very, very cognizant of project management, and we had some that had master's degrees in project management and all that stuff, so we had very, very good understanding. We had some that didn't have a very good understanding. So communication was the key. Change is difficult for everybody. And it was, we were a big organization. On the engineering side, we were about 3,500 people. So, getting that size of an organization to buy into one direction can be difficult. If you're going to try and be agile, you need to be thick-skinned, right? One of the things, and I'm going to talk about prototyping in the next slide, when you turn around and you kind of go to market before you're ready, you're going to get a lot of feedback. A lot of feedback is good, right? That's good. But you can't be too sensitive, because we'll go through an exercise, the next one. I believe very much in face-to-face conversation, especially when you're doing some kind of agile development. It loses translation on a conference call, right? Or a WebEx. And you do need to be fearless. Okay. So the example I want to go through, let's pretend, right, that you are all clients, right, and you have asked me, my team, to provide to you a Formula One race car, right? So you want a Formula One race car. We met last month, and we shook hands. We went to dinner afterwards. We had some wine, and I said, okay, I'm going to come back with a prototype, right? When I talk to my team, they want 3 months to come up with this as their prototype, right? They already have in their mind of where they're going, and they say, okay, well, that's a good place to start as a prototype. I always say, I don't want to wait 3 months. I want it by Friday, right? What can we do by Friday? So let's pretend, right, that it's been a month, and I've come back, and this is the prototype that I bought, right? So I walked in. You see a theme here, right? The donkey is the theme? Okay. So I come in, and we've got a donkey sitting up here in front, right? What's your first reaction? Not good. You're going to fire me. Maybe. I don't know. But your first reaction is not good, right? Right? I want a Formula One race car, and you bring me a donkey, okay? My first question is, what don't you like about the donkey? This is where you can really build up the points, the interaction points. Just shout it out. Do you like the smell? It's too slow. Well, how fast does it have to be not to be too slow?
Depends on the other car.
Fastest. You want it to be the fastest, right? Do you like gray? You don't want it to be gray? Okay, so that's some information, right? The next thing is, what do you like about the donkey? It's cute, yeah. It's fuel efficient. There you go, right? The amount of methane it produces is minimal, right? So anyway, so it's fuel efficient. Is that important to everybody? Is green an important thing in what you want to provide? I see in some people nodding their head, yes. Okay, so it's important. It's also dependable, right? I bought a donkey a couple of years ago in Ireland. I paid 150 euros for it. That's less than $200. A Formula One race car is going to cost you $1.5 million, $2 million, right? So it's a lot cheaper, right? That's right. You don't need a pit crew. And it will keep getting you around the track for 30 or 40 years, right? So there's some good things, right? So based on that, I would say that we've got some good information, right? Based on all the nods I saw about, being fuel efficient and being green, I would say maybe the design for this Formula One car, we might steer towards more of an electric, type of an engine construction, right? Maybe because that's more important to you. If I came back a year from now with something else, may or may not have been good. The other thing about prototyping, perfection isn't ideal, right? You're never going to get there. Money and time are always going to affect you. NPV is, yes? Comes from you. Comes from you. No, actually, we do it through focus groups and things like that, but directly with our team. Okay, so we're not customer facing. I'm talking about all. We're all internal, so it's a lot easier for us. Net present value. As you're working with your customers, they're going to come up with a series of requests, right? You have to find some way to prioritize them eventually, right? We use net present value or internal rate of return, right? Your customers will get used to that. They'll get used to the fact that they say, oh, I want this changed, and a week later you'll have it. And they'll say, wow, these guys are great. And I'll try that again next time and next time. And pretty soon, the value for the change is just not worth the effort. Right? Okay. The other thing that's important is the metrics. And when you have a large group and you want them to move in a certain direction, it's sad to say, right, people don't always do the right thing just because it's the right thing. Right? That's just human nature. So we need to use the metrics to drive the right behavior. So when we were implementing this new process, we wanted to make sure that the metrics were not too many. We didn't want to have 1,000 metrics, right? We wanted to have a few metrics that drove the right behavior. So I asked the team to generate one-word sentences that would describe the behavior that we're trying to drive. So when we first started cutting people over to the platform, the one that we put on the top of our decks and we said before our conference calls was, everybody in the pool, which meant it's out there, we want everybody to be using it, and we're going to track you and make sure that you are using it. We need compliance, right? So we had these different milestones. The first metric was percent baselined. So we kept track of every project manager every day to determine how many of their projects they had that were not baselined. The only metric we tracked for about 6 months. And we sent it out every day to the project managers, every week to the directors, and every month to the VPs. It got the desired result. People started doing it. After that, our metric was compliance to capacity, and we called that want everybody to play fair, right? If you're in an organization, a big organization, that does not do any kind of force to load analysis, if you don't do that for 150 years, what do you think happens? When you finally get a view on it, it's really not very good, right? We had some groups that were scheduled 200-300%, and some that were scheduled at 15%, right? The visibility into what was really going on kind of brought that out. So we needed the project managers to stop throwing work over the wall and start making sure they schedule it according to the ability of the resources to get the work done. We did that for about 6 months. And after that, we did compliance to schedule. And this is the play together. This is, we just kept track of what work was actually done compared to the schedule. So if the operations folks were working on projects that were scheduled, they got credit for working on those projects. If they worked on projects that weren't on the schedule, they got no credit for working on those projects. And we tracked that. And we did the same thing. We sent it out every day to the project managers, every week to the directors, and every month to the vice presidents. Got the right behavior going. So what we're working on right now is earned value and the portfolio management piece on top of the earned value. So, yeah.
So in order to get the seamless schedule, is the process always that the project manager meets with the team or gets the input, or do you use the task update features of the project? So get the input from your respective teams, and assigning them work, and then getting that, and project manager approves it.
Sure. Let me talk to you afterwards, okay? Because that's a good question. I'll talk to you afterwards, okay? Thanks. Okay. The last piece talks about collaboration. The PWA is the heart of the collaboration for our team, right? We have a symbol, a triangle symbol at the bottom of the project managers, and we have about 68 of those. On top of that, we have program managers, and there's 30 or 40 of those. On top of that, we have portfolio managers, right? And there's 15 or 20 of those. The way our process works, and this comes from some of the DFLS, the Lean Six Sigma stuff, is that if you're in that triangle and you're working in the project management process group, you work in EPM. You don't swivel chair into the financial systems or into the material systems. You work only in EPM. And that is really important. That makes whether or not the PWA is up, makes that very important, right? So there's a lot of things that we do with the PWA, and I think you've all seen some of this, so I'll go through it fairly quickly. But lots of different views, right? We have the schedule jeopardy, which I went through already. We have the vice president and the director dashboards that are attached there. We have year-to-date cost by project plus forecast, year-end cost by project all the way up to a national level. We have individual strategic programs like fiber to the cell, right? T-Mobile, Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, putting up cell towers and doing all that stuff. Well, Verizon does a lot of that actual build, right? So we place the cable and we do the electronics and that kind of stuff. So individual FiOS, right? We still have FiOS builds going on, right? Those strategic programs are all tracked, and materials forecast, right? So we've tied the materials piece in based on your schedule. If you change a schedule in the morning, the minute you save and publish it, the forecast for that material changes. So we used to have websites and weekly meetings with logistics, and they would say, "What do you need when?" And we would say, "Well, we would tell them, right?" Now we said, "No, we don't want those meetings anymore. Here's the URL. Pay your $256 for your CAL license, and you can look 10 times a day if you want. You're not going to get any better information than what's here." So that was one way we could save some time. Okay. This piece, the dashboard-driven piece was as much cultural as it was technical, right? Our process before we started was really pretty simple. And it all started with spreadsheets. We had people in the field, we had managers that were taking data, they were typing into spreadsheets, they were updating spreadsheets. It was all very, very manual. And we would have conference calls. So we would take it up to a higher level. We'd have conference calls, interpreting the data. How do we massage the data so it doesn't look as bad as without being massaged? How do we eliminate some of the things that are going on so that we don't look so bad, right? And then we would take that, and we would have these big, boring meetings. I mean, people just snoozing away, going through data on a spreadsheet. 4 or 5 people like me getting up and say, "Okay, really boring, even more boring than this." So after that, we would do what we call the postmortem. Anybody else use that term, postmortem? It's that terrible word. I mean, you got killed. How bad did you get killed, right? So it didn't go well. It was boring, and they didn't like the numbers, and we have to make some changes. And then we have all right, round 27 of the data, and you get back to the spreadsheet, and that whole circuit might take 2 weeks. There's times when you get up to the decision makers, down in Basking Ridge, wherever they are, and they're looking at the data, and it's already obsolete. That's no way really to run a business, right? So what we've introduced is dashboards. And our dashboards on our PWA platform, they refresh every 10 minutes. So the data gets updated. It's refreshed every 10 minutes. The idea is to have the people that want to talk about the status of the program to talk directly to the people in the field that are trying to implement it. No more decks, no more spreadsheets, no more weekly conference calls in order to massage the data, right? Why do you think people massage data? Yeah, right? Does that help us make good business decisions? No, it just delays the pain, right? So we definitely want to get rid of that. Yeah. Nope.
So it comes from some variance or some measure that's being automated.
Yep. So if your boss looks at it in the morning and says, "Holy cow, I'm red over here," and calls the program manager can go and they can change that if that's really what needs to be done, and 10 minutes later it'll update and it'll be yellow or green, whatever, right? We didn't want to give anybody the ability to manipulate this, right? This is the integrity of the data is important, right? Okay, so any questions on that? Yeah.
So when you were talking about that the data gets updated every 10 minutes, are you talking about from all the line of business systems?
Yes, everything. Yep. Yeah.
So adherence. So you have 75 project managers.
Yeah, we had some pretty high-level buy-in, right? But mostly metrics. Mostly metrics. With those 3 metrics that I showed you before, if you're doing those 3 metrics well, everything's going to be good, right? They cover everything. If your schedule is appropriate, if it's updated consistently, and the people that you're working with are working on the jobs that you've scheduled, you're 80% of the way there, right? So that's what we did. Okay. So here's, I know the folks from Accenture wanted to see some of the dashboards. This is another dashboard that we have that's the project management performance, right? This is the whole project management, well, the summary of all the project managers, which you can drill down to an ED, a VP, all the way down to the individual project manager's name. Right? So it could be Chris Fulham there, and it would show all of those items just for me. One, we call the project manager hygiene ones are in the middle. 99% key indicator report, right? What we do is we measure the actual timesheet hours versus the estimated time. And if the actual timesheet hours are 99% or greater than what you've scheduled, and it's not complete, it falls out on this report. The project manager needs to do something with that. Yeah.
Is this just for IT projects or?
No. It's all engineering and operations.
And does everyone track their time?
Everybody tracks their time. Yep. Yeah. Operations folks, they all track their time, right? Yep. Right. We use WorkBrain, and it flows from WorkBrain into another system. Remember the schema that I showed in the beginning? And it flows down through a couple, and it ends up in EPM. Okay. And we also, transparency is a big thing. And if you're going to be rolling out a new platform, right, people are going to say it's too slow, right, it doesn't do this, the whole prototyping deal, right? So one of the things that we had to do is we had to come up with a dashboard, transparency for our team as well. How is the platform performing? Right? And this, like the rest, is updated every 10 minutes. And you'll see the big loader that we have is the Delta loader, which manages all the changes. And you'll see daily we do 5,000, 6,000 projects automatically, right, without the project managers having to open them. And you can see the average time to process based on all the different loaders down there. A lot of times we get calls and we get complaints. We say, okay, go to the PWA, pull it up. We'll both pull up together, and we'll say, well, it doesn't take that long. Right? You're telling me it takes 45 minutes to open up a project. You know, it's really not taking that long. Yes? It ignores it. Yep. 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 Let me think about that, because there's a couple, but I'm not really sure. But I'll get to that in the end, because I think I'm running low on time here. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the summary. Rob Hirschman's here with Progility. They've been our partner throughout this whole piece, and I'd like to give him a chance to, share with you what his perspective was working with us, because it certainly is germane, right, to what we're doing. But in order to be successful, these are the 4 things that we pulled up from experience. 1, you need to have a good plan, and you need to be agile, right? You can't stick to it too tightly, right? Things are going to change. You need to have a good team. They got to be resilient, right? Things are going to change. People aren't going to like the prototypes. You got to keep with it. You got to be able to innovate, right? We weren't going to be able to do this unless we were able to creatively solve some of those problems that, quite frankly, we didn't know how we were going to solve. And you need to have a good partner. Right? So on that note, I'm going to ask Rob to come up and just share a little bit on the partner experience. And see little Stevie?
That's you, not me, right? Yeah. Exactly. It's little Stevie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so. So yeah, when we entered into this endeavor, it was really interesting. Chris actually started this as a Skunkworks project. There was nobody from IT involved. I think you actually asked IT how long it would take and what it would cost, didn't you?
Yeah, $16 million in 4 years.
Yeah. That didn't seem reasonable, did it?
No, that wasn't reasonable.
Not at all. So in the end of the day, the framework that you saw that we implemented took, between 9 and 12 months, I think it was? Yeah. Cost overall with hardware, software, services, everything, about $1 million?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit less.
And came in on time, on budget?
Ahead of time.
Ahead of time. We came in early, right?
Yep, under budget.
Yep. And the key was those iterations, because we went in, and Chris, no IT background, right?
Nope.
Lisa, Steve?
Lisa has some.
Lisa has a little, but Steve,
none.
field engineering, like
That's
Yeah. So we're dealing with people who didn't know anything about systems development. So going in and really developing something that was just basically in his head. And coming up with a solution and saying, well, I want it to integrate with these 6 systems. Here's what I want it to do. And I want it to auto-load and auto-create schedules. We said, that's crazy, but let's do it. So we put, I think we only had 3 people on the team, didn't we?
Yep.
3 people on our side, 3 on your side, and we went at it. And in 9 months, we figured it out. It was great. Some of the things we learned, actually, from our perspective is the culture. I mean, Verizon is a very interesting culture in that it was really the bringing together of lots of different companies. Right? It was the acquisition of Pacific Bell, and you had Northeastern Bell.
South, 9X.
9X. So it was really, 16 or 17 different companies rolled into one. So every region had its own culture, had its own processes, and Chris was trying to do something to unify it across the entire organization to do project management more efficiently, effectively, at a broad scale. So one of the keys we learned is, don't fear the change in the culture. Chris had no fear of that, and that really helped drive the change. And he rolled it out in a series of pilots. He started with the districts that were most open to it. I think it was, New York, New Jersey?
New Jersey and
New Jersey.
Capital Region, New York.
They're generally the most friendly people in the country, aren't they?
Well, yeah, they are. Absolutely.
Just don't try to cross the bridges, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. New York, New Jersey, Mid-Atlantic, kind of worked his way around the country selling the concept. So building out the prototype, building out the pilot, selling the concept, and getting more people on board, and not fearing that change in the culture. The key is that change takes time. So we're, 4 years later, 4.5 years later, getting great adoption now. Right? But it took 3-4 years to get that adoption, to get people to trust the metrics, and the building up of those metrics was really important, having some kind of metrics as you go out there. One of the things we always stress is something called the MOST model. So technology was a huge part of this project, but there's really 3 other key factors that are critical. There's M is the management, so having management support, and Chris has always had executive level buy-in for this project. He never had executive big budgets for it, but he always had sponsors saying, please build this thing, that would really help our business. So they always gave him a limited amount of money and a limited amount of people, and he figured it out. The second thing is operational, and having operational level support for the people on the ground that are doing the work, showing them what's in it for them. So really doing those road shows was really critical. And we went out with him, went to a couple of the districts, showed them what's possible, showed them the value, and tried to get them to understand that this was a critical part of their jobs. And S is really all about the social, and that's really socializing the application and making it really a part of the entire One Verizon, the whole Verizon culture. And that was critical to actually getting it out there and getting people to use it. So we used the MOST model, and that helped drive change. Putting fear away. So whenever you add systems integration, it makes EPM an enterprise system. If it's a standalone stovepiped application, a lot of times people aren't going to consider it enterprise. So if you go about going down the road of doing systems integration, understand it's going to be harder to do, but it will glue EPM into the organization in a way where it's harder to extract it when the PMO, someone goes to the PMO and goes, I don't want you here anymore. Right? We don't need project management. Well, this core system helps us run our business. And Chris has built this whole solution to how they run their business. So they're never going to yank EPM out of there. It's a critical part. It's really a core application in their organization. Also, when you go into systems integration environments, you're going to be partnering with somebody, either the finance folks, the operations folks, human resources folks. You need data from their systems, and they have to cooperate to get that information. So you have to show them the value they're going to get out of this. It's going to cause them less work, less pain. You're going to be able to better enable the field. So think about partnering with those organizations, showing it what's in it for them. And again, it's really hard to go enterprise unless you integrate this with other processes and applications you have. Finally, on the dream big, I mean, you saw a small team doing huge things. It was all about dreaming big and putting a massive solution in place that could be done in a short amount of time to take advantage of an opportunity. And that's exactly what Chris and his team did. The key here is really it's about small teams. You don't need a team of 20 people to build a really great solution. You need 3 or 4 really focused people with really great skills that can go out and execute on a mission and work together. And we partnered up very closely with Chris and Lisa and Steve and everybody on the Verizon team, and also through knowledge transfer. So after we were done, we handed it off. Chris has brought us back in to help with the 2010 upgrade and some other tasks. But overall, it was a good transition. His team can support the application now, and they're building some really cool stuff. Some of the last dashboards you saw, they built on their own, which is great. And even in a large organization, large change takes time, but it's something that you can do. And change is really when things are exciting, and that's when you can really have an impact with something like EPM. So this is really our perspective of the project from looking back over the last 4 years, and that's it. So, Chris.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Rob.
Sure.
So any questions? I know we did have one question in the back, and I did think of something. Okay? One of the issues that we had with some new project managers was getting them to understand intuitively, right, how Microsoft Project works when you update it. Right? So one of the things that they struggled with was, okay, my task is complete. right? And some of it has to do with how you configure it, right? Because we've got an enterprise system, so you got to configure it in a certain way. But what happens when I put in an actual complete date? Okay, what happens? What happens to the hours, that kind of thing, versus what happens when I click 100% complete, right? How does the status date figure into, all of that stuff? And when you have automation going on, which is going behind the scenes and actually doing things, right? They needed to understand how it was going to change their program and how they were going to change their project. So we had a lot of questions in the beginning. I went home last night. My schedule was perfect. I pulled it up right before my meeting, and it was all kaflooey. And they didn't use that word, but it was all messed up. How did that happen? And I said, well, this is what happens, right? Going through and trying to make sure that your projects react the way that you need them to. Yeah. Yep. So we did have some hurdles that we had to address. Yep. Any other questions? Yes.
When you talk about integration, is this a one-way? Like we pulling stuff from other languages? Are we sending some information back?
You are absolutely the winner. There you go. All right. No, we do actually take, EPM does compute a lot of things, right? Scheduled finish date, actual number of hours, actual cost, all of that stuff. And we do integrate that back into the enterprise systems. We do. Yep, it's a two-way street. Yep. Yes?
A little bit more about your integration with your time. You have a separate timesheet or time tracking system.
Correct.
And you said it feeds just both ways or one way to
Okay.
the server.
All right. Actual time, and let's just talk about one component of it. Let's talk about technicians in the field. Okay? We have technicians in the field that are completing their timesheets, and they're actually doing work, right? That's actually driving cost into the project, right, into that individual task. And we take that data, that timesheet data, and we bring that into the project. Okay? One of the problems that we have is that project managers estimate the amount of work it's going to take. They might estimate it's going to be 100 hours, right? It might only take 60. It might take 312, right? There is the project manager needs to be cognizant of that, right? Because if you complete that task, it's going to tell you that it took really whatever you estimated it at, regardless of what the actual timesheets were, right? So they need to be able to make those changes if they need to, and most of the time they need to. Did I answer the right question? No, I guess not.
Well, that's good enough. I was just curious if it was an actual connection with your time tracking system and project server, because I'm wondering, in the project server, you have these tasks, right? You have to update actual hours worked, and remaining hours, and I wasn't quite sure how that.
Okay, the project managers do that through the schedule input screen for the most part, right? They can put in actual hours. If they want to do percent complete, right, it'll compute that for them, or they can put in actual hours and remaining hours. They can do one or the other, okay? Aside from that, you also have another system where those actual timesheet hours are aggregating, and they are different, right?
So they're different.
They are different, right? That is different. That's how the technicians get paid, and all of that stuff. But that time that they charge to that project and to that task, that does accrue. Okay, so actual work in EPM might not necessarily, and almost always, doesn't exactly equal the timesheet hours that were charged. No. Nope. Because we don't use actual hours in EPM for timesheets or for computing someone's pay or something like that. The issue is that timesheet hours are always delayed, at least in Verizon, right? You might be out placing cable today. You might charge 8 hours. You put your timesheet in tonight. It might go through. There might be a timesheet error. You don't know, right? We don't know. But there's a pretty high failure rate on that, right? If you were going to look at it, it's certainly not, 6 nines, right? It's maybe 90%, right? Yes. Work brain, yep.
So, do you also set up by project? So, the technician is entering time to that project, and then you're able to somehow link whatever charge to that project, and because the project number may be mapping to EPM, so you can avoid the time.
Right, that's exactly it. And it was very, very difficult because we needed to have a unique identifier for every task, right? Because the technician would charge their time, right? They would charge their time to the project, right? But they would charge it to a work operation. And in our terminology, it's a task code, right? We had to map that project and that task code because we had to projectize it to the correct task in the WBS, which might be a higher level, right? They might have a different task code for every reel of cable they place, right? Well, the project managers aren't going to track it by reel. We just want to know, is all the cable placed? So that would be one task. So you might have a task that is an aggregation of 6, 8, 10, 12 task codes, each one getting time charged to it. So it all needed to have a unique identifier so that it aggregates up correctly. So that was a very challenging task. It was really very, very complicated. Yes.
You had a slide about the bottom layer was tracking baseline schedules or not? Remember you had a layer of
Yep.
way they were tracking adoption?
Yep.
And you said you need to measure how many schedules are baseline first, and then you aggregate it up to some other more mature process. Anyway, that one right there.
Yep.
So a percentage of baseline, that's something that we're going through in our organization as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we're tracking baseline, but one, how did you control that these are bad schedules that you're baselining? Because you can check if it's baseline or not, but it could be something that doesn't flex, right, has all these hard-coded dates or whatever.
Correct.
That's one question. And the second is how did you control the rebaselining? If you have a kind of a savvy PM, it will rebaseline to get it to green.
Correct. Yep.
So those two questions.
Okay. So the first one, right? In the beginning, I wasn't too concerned about whether they were scheduling it appropriately, right? I wanted to make sure that everybody got in and was playing in the sandbox, right? I wanted to make sure that they were in Microsoft Project, in EPM, and not maintaining their spreadsheets and doing all of that stuff. So the first 1% baseline, most of the schedules were what I would call inappropriate. There wasn't enough work or there was too much work, right? But once I got everybody in and we were 99% compliant, then we went to compliance to capacity. And then what we did is we took snapshots every week and said, there's this much work scheduled, right, by day, and there's this much capacity. If there's this much capacity and you've got this much work, that's no good. If there's this much capacity, you've got this much work, that's no good. So we gave them plus or minus 15%. They could schedule up to 150% or down to 85%. So if they were non-compliant, right, then everybody knew that Chris Fulham was not doing his, not being diligent on his work. Once we got the schedules, kind of even for the most part with the capacity, then we went to the compliance to schedule. So we did it one at a time, right, kind of build on the project management maturity without generating too many metrics. So if you do all three of those metrics pretty well, you're like 80% of the way there, right? We allow our project managers to rebaseline because sometimes we need to. Now, in the example I gave before with July 6th, right, we're not going to make it. The salesperson might call Accenture, and they might say, well, yeah, the building's not built yet, right? Yeah, we're not going to be ready July 6th anyway, so they might agree to August 6th. At that point, sure, you're supposed to rebaseline, right? We have a new plan. It meets the customer needs, rebaseline. So we allow the project managers to do that at this point. There's been some talk about taking that ability away. I'm against that. I would rather leave it with the project managers. Okay. Yes, sir.
How is the culture when it comes to training? Because it seems like your organization is using project in a little different way than what normally it's being used. So if a project manager joins your team and has a total different way of doing things, checking out the schedule and doing it rather than using the form interface, how did you cope up with that training? And it's like, did you find any resistance to that? Or?
Do we have any resistance, Rod? No, everybody was all happy with what we were doing. You kidding? I came to work January of 2011. They actually had a parade for me out in front of the building, ticker tape, all that stuff. No, they think I'm a pain in the ass. But anyway, we do lots of training. My team actually is an REP, Registered Educational Provider for PMI, and we provide ongoing training all the time. We do identify project managers that need training. Right? So we do that. We also bring in, other consultants to do training. Eric from Project Pro, he came in and did some training for us for program managers, portfolio managers, and project managers. All of that stuff is, needs to be a part of what we do. Right? It's really the understanding of the project manager. You can have, whiz-bang, great types of technology if they don't understand the concepts behind it. Right? And this is it's a little bit different, but the concepts are the same, right? So training was really actually very, very important. Okay, good questions. Anybody else? No? Okay. Listen, thank you, everybody. I had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And if you have any questions, well, we'll hang around for a little bit. Thanks.